Assalamu alaikum, my dear students. I hope you all are doing good. So, in our last class, we have seen about the pituitary gland, and we have also seen what are the different hormones which are secreted by the pituitary gland, both from the anterior pituitary as well as the posterior pituitary. Okay, so posterior pituitary. We have seen the two hormones which are released from the posterior pituitary, and one of those hormones is antidiuretic hormone. So today we will mainly focus on the antidiuretic hormone and what are the actions of the antidiuretic hormone in our body. Fine. So I hope you remember this. This is the diagram of the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. And this hypothalamus is connected with the pituitary gland. It has the connection with both the posterior pituitary as well as the anterior pituitary. And it has the connection with the posterior pituitary, and that connection is called as the hypophyseal tract. Okay, tract is the bundle of axons. You can see here these axons are coming down from the hypothalamus into the posterior pituitary. Okay, actually the hormones, both the antidiuretic hormone as well as the oxytocin, which are secreted from the posterior pituitary, they are actually synthesized in the hypothalamus. Fine. Once they are synthesized in the hypothalamus in these cell bodies, those hormones are transported down the axon and they are stored here in the axon terminal. Fine. We have seen that in our previous class. Fine. So one of the this hypothalamus is made up of, or it contains different nuclei, and one of the nucleus we have seen in the hypothalamus is called as supraoptic nucleus. Supraoptic nucleus. Fine. And this supraoptic nucleus is the one which is actually synthesizing this antidiuretic hormone. Fine. Once this antidiuretic hormone is synthesized, let me repeat this, this antidiuretic hormone is transported down the axon and it is stored here in the axon terminal. And from the axon terminal, it is released or it is secreted out of the posterior pituitary once this supraoptic nucleus is receiving or getting a particular stimulus. Fine. So first of all, we need to know what is the stimulus which will stimulate the supraoptic nucleus, and it will send the action potentials down the axon to the axon terminals, and that will lead to the secretion of antidiuretic hormone out of the posterior pituitary. Fine. So here is antidiuretic hormone. So first we will see what are the stimulus which are stimulating the supraoptic nucleus for the release of antidiuretic hormone. Fine. So first stimulus is our decreased blood pressure. Whenever in our body there is decreased blood pressure, that is hypotension, that will lead to release of the antidiuretic hormone. Fine. And the second stimulus is very important stimulus, that is the increased plasma osmolarity. Okay, increased plasma osmolarity, that means our plasma is hypertonic or hyperosmolar. What do you mean by that? That means in our plasma we have decreased amount of water and we have increased amount of solutes. Fine. Usually, normally what happens, our plasma is actually isoosmolar or isotonic, but whenever there is increased plasma osmolarity, that means our plasma becomes hypertonic or hyperosmolar, that will lead to release of the antidiuretic hormone. Now we'll see what happens this antidiuretic hormone once it is released out of the posterior pituitary, what are its actions. Fine. So, before we see the actions, let me tell you about this diagram. Okay, this is the diagram of nephron. You all might be knowing this is the diagram of nephron. This is the functional unit of our kidney. Okay, our kidneys are involved in the formation of urine, and that formation of urine is actually done by this unit which is called as nephron. Okay, and nephron, you all might be knowing the parts of the nephron. Here is the Bowman's capsule. Here is the proximal convoluted tubule. Here is this U-shaped structure, that is the loop of Henle. Here is the distal convoluted tubule, and this is the collecting duct. And this part, this collecting duct is the part जिसमें जो है बहुत सारे distal convoluted tubule जो है वो इस collecting duct में वो urine drain करते हैं. Once that urine comes out of the collecting duct, then that goes into the minor calyces, major calyces. That is the different topic. Okay, so this nephron is involved in the formation of urine. Fine. So we have that filtrate coming from here, from these renal tubules, and that filtrate is reaching here in the collecting duct. Okay, and the main जो component है इस filtrate का और इस urine का, that is our water. So I have told you that these are the two stimuli which are stimulating supraoptic nucleus for the release of antidiuretic hormone. So first is decreased blood pressure. So what our aim should be, we have to increase the blood pressure. Okay, and the second is the increased plasma osmolarity. Plasma has become hypertonic, so we have to decrease that plasma osmolarity. Okay, so now this is the collecting duct, and this collecting duct जो है, it contains many cells here, and one of the cell here is called as principal cell. This principal cell is one of the cell which is present here in the collecting duct. Okay, and this principal cell has a special receptor here. And this receptor is specially for the antidiuretic hormone. And this antidiuretic hormone is also called as vasopressin. Fine. And this receptor here on this principal cell is called as vasopressin receptor. To be more specific, it is called as vasopressin type 2 receptor. Fine. So this vasopressin type 2 receptor is specially for the antidiuretic hormone. So what happens whenever the supraoptic nucleus is stimulated, and who will stimulate? It will be stimulated by this increased plasma osmolarity. Fine. And it will be stimulated by this decreased blood pressure. Fine. So we have special receptors in the hypothalamus. Fine, that will actually detect these things, that will detect the increased plasma osmolarity, that will detect the changes in the plasma osmolarity. Fine, and these receptors here are called as osmoreceptors. Fine, so whenever there is change in the plasma osmolarity, that is detected by these osmoreceptors which are present in the hypothalamus. And once these osmoreceptors are activated or stimulated, or they get this change in the plasma osmolarity, these osmoreceptors stimulate our supraoptic nucleus. Fine. And this supraoptic nucleus is generating the action potential. That action potential is sent down, and then from the axon terminal we are releasing the antidiuretic hormone. Fine. Now, we have this decreased blood pressure here. Decreased blood pressure is the another stimulus for the release of antidiuretic hormone. Okay, I hope you might be knowing about this. This decreased blood pressure, whenever there is decreased blood pressure, there is a special mechanism which is running in our body, that is called as renin-angiotensin system. Okay, so वहां पे जो है एक हार्मोन रिलीज होता है या फॉर्म होता है, दैट इज कॉल्ड एज एंजियोटेंसिन 2. Fine, and that angiotensin 2 जो है, it plays different functions or different roles in our body, and one of the function or one of the action of this angiotensin 2 is it goes and acts on the hypothalamus, and there is a special receptor for this angiotensin 2 also, and this angiotensin 2 receptor जो यहाँ पे hypothalamus में होता है, it is activated by this angiotensin 2. Okay, and once it is activated, it also stimulates this supraoptic nucleus. Fine. One more time. Whenever there is decreased blood pressure in our body, whenever there is increased plasma osmolarity in our body, okay, both these things actually stimulate our supraoptic nucleus for the release of anti-diuretic hormone. Whenever there is increased plasma osmolarity, that means in our plasma there is decreased water, increased solutes. This change in the plasma osmolarity is detected by the osmoreceptors which are present in the hypothalamus, and once they detect this change in the plasma osmolarity, they stimulate the supraoptic nucleus. The second thing is decreased blood pressure. Decreased blood pressure, there will be a mechanism in our body which is called as renin-angiotensin system, and renin-angiotensin system mein hormone form hota hai, that is called as angiotensin 2, and this angiotensin 2 has its action on different parts of our body, and one of them is our hypothalamus. Hypothalamus जो है angiotensin 2 हमारे hypothalamus तक भी ये information पहुंचा देता है that there is decreased blood pressure, and this receptor here, it also stimulates this supraoptic nucleus. And once this supraoptic nucleus is stimulated by the osmoreceptors, and this receptor which is for the angiotensin 2, it sends the action potential down and leads to the release of anti-diuretic hormone, okay, or the vasopressin. Fine. Once this anti-diuretic hormone is released, it goes and acts on the kidneys. And where in the kidneys? In the nephrons. And where in the nephron? In the collecting duct. And where in the collecting duct? On the principal cell. Fine. Why it acts on the principal cell only? Because principal cell only has the receptor which is called as vasopressin type 2 receptor, which is specially for our anti-diuretic hormone. Fine. Now this anti-diuretic hormone or the vasopressin, it comes and binds on this receptor. Fine. It comes and binds on this receptor, and once it binds on this receptor actually activates a protein inside which is called as G-stimulatory protein. Okay, which activates a protein which is called as G-stimulatory protein. And once this G-stimulatory protein is activated, it activates one enzyme which is present on this cell, and that enzyme is called as adenylate cyclase. Okay, and this adenylate cyclase जो है, it converts our ATP into cyclic AMP. Okay, and this cyclic AMP activates an enzyme which is called as protein kinase A. One more time. This anti-diuretic hormone or vasopressin, once it is released from the posterior pituitary, it comes and binds on this receptor which is called as V2 receptor or vasopressin type 2 receptor. This vasopressin type 2 receptor, once this ADH binds on it, it gets activated and it activates the G-stimulatory protein. And this G-stimulatory protein activates this enzyme adenylate cyclase, and this converts ATP into cyclic AMP, and cyclic AMP activates protein kinase A. Fine. Now what this protein kinase A is doing? This protein kinase A is actually leading to two pathways. Okay, ये दो चीजें करता है इस सेल में. पहली चीज जो ये protein kinase A है, it acts on the nucleus of this cell. Okay, it acts on the nucleus of this cell, and in the nucleus we have the DNA. और ये जो प्रोटीन काइनेस ए जो है, ये स्पेसिफिक जीन्स को इस न्यूक्लियस में एक्टिवेट करता है. ओके, और स्पेसिफिक जीन्स को जब ये एक्टिवेट करता है, दैट लीड्स टू द प्रोसेस ऑफ ट्रांसक्रिप्शन एंड देन ट्रांसलेशन, अल्टीमेटली द फॉर्मेशन ऑफ प्रोटीन्स. Okay, and those proteins, after being synthesized inside the cell, they go into the endoplasmic reticulum, they go into the Golgi apparatus, and they are packed in the form of vesicles. Okay, so here is that vesicle, and that vesicle is containing these proteins. Fine? So these are the membrane proteins which are present in this vesicle actually. And this vesicle or these proteins were formed once this protein kinase A was activated, and protein kinase A acts on specific genes here, and those genes जो है specific genes which are responsible for the formation of these proteins. And after the formation of these proteins, they go into the endoplasmic reticulum, they go into rough endoplasmic reticulum, they go into the Golgi apparatus, and then they are packed in these vesicles, and on the membrane of these vesicles, here are the proteins which were formed. So this is the first thing what is done by the protein kinase A. The second thing is, now this protein kinase A acts on this vesicle. Okay, and it activates special proteins, the proteins which are responsible for the movement of this vesicle towards the luminal membrane. Okay, here is the lumen of the collecting duct. Okay, this is the luminal membrane, and this is the basolateral membrane here. Fine. So once this vesicle is formed inside the cell, now this vesicle is moving towards this membrane actually. Okay, now after reaching this membrane, this vesicle gets fused with this membrane. This vesicular membrane, it gets fused with this membrane, and these proteins are now here in this membrane. These proteins, they are actually transporter proteins. They are actually spatial channels. Okay, this vesicular membrane, it gets fused with this membrane, and the proteins here now come in this membrane, definitely. Fine? And these spatial proteins, these spatial channels are called as aquaporin 2. Okay, aquaporin 2. We have aquaporin 1 here in the descending limb of loop of Henle. Okay, that is the separate topic. So these channels are called as aquaporin 2. And we have aquaporin 3 and 4, which are present on the basolateral membrane of this principal cell. Fine? So these channels are called as aquaporin 3 and 4. Fine? They are called as aquaporin 3 and 4. Now, these channels, once this vesicle gets fused with this membrane, now these channels come here. What will happen? These channels are called as aquaporin 2. Aquaporin, that means they are spatial water channels. Now what will happen? There is water here in this filtrate. Okay, during the formation of urine, once this filtrate comes through these renal tubules, that reaches the collecting duct, and the main component of this urine or this filtrate is the water. Okay, once these channels come here in this membrane, what will happen? This water will move inside the cell. Okay, and water once moves inside the cell, now this water moves through these channels which are aquaporin 2 and 3. Sorry, 3 and 4. Okay, and once it moves out of the cell, it goes back into the circulation. Fine? So water from these renal tubules, we have moved this water back into the circulation. Okay, so once this water moves in the circulation, what happens to plasma volume? Definitely plasma volume will increase. Okay, and if plasma volume increases, what will happen to blood volume? Definitely blood volume will also increase. Okay, if blood volume increases, what will happen to blood pressure? That will definitely increase. Okay, so blood pressure will increase. So decreased blood pressure stimulated this. So our aim was to increase the blood pressure. So we have moved a lot of water from renal tubules into the principal cell back into the circulation, and we have moved a lot of water, and ultimately we have increased our blood pressure. Okay, now the second thing was increased plasma osmolarity. What was there in the plasma? There was decreased quantity of water, increased quantity of solutes. So our aim was to make this plasma isotonic or isoosmolar. It was hypertonic or hyperosmolar. Fine. So we are moving this water back in the circulation. So in the plasma, quantity of water will increase, and it will increase until it will become, this plasma will become isotonic or isoosmolar. Fine, I hope this makes sense. I hope this is clear. Fine. Now, this antidiuretic hormone has the first action on the principal cell, and in the principal cell, it ultimately activates these aquaporin 2 channels, and we are retaining a lot of water back from the renal tubules back in the circulation. Fine. Now, this antidiuretic hormone has one more action there in our body, and this antidiuretic hormone actually has the action on our blood vessels. Fine. Blood vessels has the, suppose here is one blood vessel, here is the blood vessel contains the smooth muscles, and suppose here is one smooth muscle cell. Fine. Now smooth muscle cells जो है, they also have special receptor on them, and that receptor is called as vasopressin type 1 receptor. So we have seen type 2 receptor there in the principal cell of the collecting duct of the nephron, and here is the V1 receptor, that is vasopressin type 1 receptor, which is present in the blood vessels. Fine. Now, this antidiuretic hormone comes and binds on this V1 receptor. Okay. Now, this V1 receptor, once the antidiuretic hormone binds with it, it activates a special pathway inside the cell or special mechanism inside the cell, which ultimately what it does is we have the sarcoplasmic reticulum inside the smooth muscle cell. Okay, or we, in simple language, will say there is smooth endoplasmic reticulum. Fine, and smooth endoplasmic reticulum has a special function. Suppose here is the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. Smooth endoplasmic reticulum has a special function of storage of calcium. Okay, now that calcium is stored there. This antidiuretic hormone, it ultimately what it does is it leads to the release of calcium from the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. Okay, then second thing what it does is it activates special channels, actually calcium channels in these smooth muscle cells, and the calcium from outside will rush into the cell. Fine. So there is a lot of calcium now inside the smooth muscle cell. Which smooth muscle cell? The smooth muscle cell of the blood vessels. Fine. Now, if there is a lot of calcium inside the cell, what will happen? The cell, there will be contraction in the smooth muscles. Okay, and once these smooth muscle cells will contract, what will happen to these blood vessels? There will be vasoconstriction. And if there is vasoconstriction, what will happen to diameter of these blood vessels? Diameter will decrease, and that will lead to increased peripheral resistance. Okay, and if there is increased peripheral resistance, what will happen to blood pressure? That will definitely increase. Okay, so we had decreased blood pressure, now we have increased blood pressure by two ways. One is right here, we have taken back a lot of water in the circulation, and that has increased plasma volume, that has increased blood volume, that has increased blood pressure. And the second thing is we have done the vasoconstriction. Vasoconstriction leads to increased peripheral resistance, and peripheral resistance जब increase होती है, that will lead to increase the blood pressure. Fine. So these are the main actions. These are the actions actually of the antidiuretic hormone. I hope it was clear. One more time we'll repeat. The antidiuretic hormone, the first action is the retention of water from the renal tubules back in the circulation, okay? And when we are retaining a lot of water back in the circulation, we are increasing the blood pressure and we are decreasing the plasma osmolarity. Okay, the second action is on the smooth muscles of the blood vessels, and smooth muscles में ये calcium को release कराता है, and when the calcium is released, then that leads to the contraction, and contraction leads to vasoconstriction. Actually, vasoconstriction leads to decrease in the diameter, that leads to increase the peripheral resistance, and once the peripheral resistance is increased, that leads to increase in the blood pressure. Fine. That is all for the antidiuretic hormone. I hope it was clear. If you really understood it, or if you have any questions, you can ask me in the comment section. And if you understood, then please like and share this video. Thank you.